Datta-Ray is here, so I come in. Would you like to come in? A very good afternoon, Ambassador Blackwill, Mr. Datta-Ray, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to warmly welcome each one of you to this Aspen India event in Kolkata today. The Kolkata chapter of Aspen India was launched about a year and a half ago in May 2010, where the Governor M.K. Narayanan spoke on India's engagement with the world. Since then, we've invited thought leaders from different walks of life to come and address Aspen public sessions such as these, which foster an environment for open and frank dialogue. We are indeed very privileged to have Ambassador Blackwill with us today. Ambassador Blackwell's association with Aspen India and CII go back a very long time. He was the force behind launching the US-India Track 2 dialogues way back in 2002. More recently, he co-chaired with Ambassador Naresh Chandra a major report titled The United States and India, A Shared Strategic Future, a report that Aspen India brought out jointly this year with the Council on Foreign Relations. We are delighted that the Ambassador could be with us, especially in Kolkata today. Mr. Shunanda Datta-Ray needs no introduction in Kolkata. He's a columnist, author of several books, including Waiting for America, India and the US in the New Millennium, and the award-winning Looking East to Look West, Lee Kuan Yew's Mission India. He was also the former editor of The Statesman. Mr. Datta-Ray, may we now please request you to introduce our keynote speaker and chair the session. Mr. Datta-Ray.
The question that has roots in Ambassador Blackwill's own preferences. How many in this room have seen the Taj Mahal? I would like you to raise your hand if you have. Well, thank you. Ambassador Robert Blackwill divides the world into people like us, and people like us are those who have been fortunate enough to see the Taj Mahal, and people like them are those who haven't. He is also very taken with Jaisalmer Fort and Jaisalmer. Now that's a long way from Calcutta, but I would like to tell him that Jaisalmer Fort inspired one of Satyajit Ray's epic films, Shonar Kella, and there is a connection there. Not with the history, the 1,000-year-old history of Jaisalmer, but certainly with the sun shining on the golden ramparts. Now the other day I read something which I'll read out to you, a sentence. It said the American ambassador is an anachronism, kept alive by a conspiracy between the occupants of the post and those who eat at his expense. That was, it's not to be taken lightly, because it was no less than Professor J.K. Galbraith, himself an American ambassador, who said this. And I wondered whether he was suggesting Mr. Blackwill is an anachronism, or whether my dear friend Peter Burdey, the present Chargé d'Affaires, whom some of you may remember as a young man in Calcutta in the 70s, a very enterprising and adventurous young man at the consulate here, whether he was calling him an anachronism. But no, Mr. Galbraith was referring to the British ambassador in London, to the American ambassador in London. He is an anachronism because I don't know that he quite meant that England is the 51st state, but he meant that there's no need for an ambassador there. The American ambassador to India is very, very relevant, especially to Pakistan and to Indo-Pakistan relations. Only last night I received an email from a journalist in Rawalpindi saying that India's RAW, Israel's Mossad, under the tutelage of America's CIA, was bent on destabilizing and destroying Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, but also China and Iran. Now, such suspicions crop up every so often, probably because of the conduct of the American ambassador in Roosevelt House in Delhi. And Mr. The present ambassador, Mr. Blackwill, during his time was described by a fairly well-known American political analyst, Ershad Mahmood of the Institute of Policy Studies, and you may be aware of this, sir, as Delhi's front man rather than the US ambassador to India. And he was Delhi's front man because he was, and again I quote Mahmood, because he was instigating and encouraging India to be more hostile, more aggressive to Pakistan than even India wanted to be. So India, Pakistan and the US are closely linked. Earlier this week, two senior members of the American Senate, John McCain and Lindsey Graham, asked that the United States reconsider its relations with Pakistan. He also asked that the United States should reconsider, seriously take a second look at American security and economic assistance, which amounts to something like $20 billion since 2001 to Pakistan. Now, why should that concern us? Why should America's relations with Pakistan concern us? And that's what we are here to discuss this morning. Pakistan is the Siamese twin. America is the lone superpower. Whatever America does in one country impacts on the other. And I came across many references, instances of this, some years ago when I was researching my book that Rita Sri referred to, Waiting for America, India and the US in the New Millennium. And permit me a minor diversion. At the time of writing the book, when I began the book, Ambassador Richard Celeste, Mr. Blackwill's predecessor, was very kind, gave me a lot of time, and then Mr. Blackwill did too, a chat in Roosevelt House about things. To my grief, when the book was published, I was living in Singapore, and my publishers said that Ambassador Blackwill wouldn't give them the time to launch the book. But that's another story. Going back to the mainstream, two incidents right at the inception of India, which figure in my book and which struck me then, show how closely the three countries are knit. Shortly after partition, within a few months, Nehru asked President Truman for 10 transport planes to transfer 50,000 Hindus who had fled from Punjab to the northwest frontier province. 500 of them had tried to wend their way across the plains to India. They were waylaid and massacred. That news was not published in India, it was suppressed. And Nehru said that if that news leaked out to the Indian press, the consequences would be dire. There would be reaction here and there would be reaction in Pakistan. Now the ambassador in India, the American ambassadors in India, have a long succession of them, have been favorably inclined to the government. And therefore to that extent they've been less favorably looked upon by the State Department. The ambassador then, Henry Grady, supported that demand. President Truman was reported to be favorable. But the Secretary of State, George Marshall, said we can't send planes into Pakistan unless the Pakistanis agree. Liaquat Ali Khan, Prime Minister, was contacted and he said he had no objection. Then Secretary of State said that's not enough, we must have a specific invitation from the Pakistanis to send 10 transport planes to ferry 50,000 Hindus from the northwest frontier province to India. Now that was the impossible condition, and so it wasn't met. The second instance I came across of India, Pakistan, the United States caught in this kind of logjam was 3 years later in 1950. We faced famine then. Vijayalakshmi Pandit, ambassador, told the United States that 2 million people, more than 2 million people, were expected to perish, and between 8 and 10 million people would suffer from disease, malnutrition, and all the associated ills of famine. The State Department decided to call their Pakistani ambassador to Washington into discussions. The ambassador took a very pious view. He said it was always mandatory in Islam to succor the suffering. But alas, India had brought its own suffering on its own head. by greedily converting agricultural fields to cash crops like cotton and tobacco. And alack and alas, he said, if you give them aid, if you give them food aid at this time, they will use their own resources to make machine tools and import weapons. So that too fell through. Now, these are instances of how what happens in one country happens in another, impacts on the other. And while America's policy with towards Pakistan and India has always been regarded, by us at least, as hyphenated, the US doesn't have to do anything to put in the hyphen. What it does in one country automatically creates a repercussion in the other. Now, there are many such instances. There were conferences in the 50s, late 40s, about the time India became independent, conferences of senior American diplomats and generals. One was in Nuwara Eliya in Sri Lanka, Ceylon then, deciding on their attitude, future policy to these two countries about to become independent. And the consensus was that while Pakistan was of immense strategic value to the United States, India was of nil strategic value. There was President Eisenhower's assurance that American weapons to Pakistan would not be used against India. And in fact, they were. And in fact, another ambassador, another of Mr. Blackwill's illustrious predecessors, very friendly towards India, Mr. Chester Bowles, says in his memoirs that looking at those weapons, you could see, even a layman could see, that they were intended for deployment across flat plains, not in the mountains, against the Soviet Union, as it then was, or Communist China, as it then was. And then you have Dr. Henry Kissinger saying that he preferred the, I quote, simple, more direct Pakistani Muslim to the complex and tortuous Hindu India. And that prompted Abe Rosenthal, a journalist I knew and respected in the New York Times, to write that the United States liked Pakistan not despite its military dictatorship, but because of it. And Rosenthal added, man, those generals can get things going. And again, I saw an article in Foreign Policy, I think the other day, which put a different gloss on this preference. And it said that the American favorite in Pakistan was rape, R-A-P-E. And the author, Michael Waltz, I think, said rape stands for rich, Anglophile, Pakistani elite. Rich, Anglophile, Pakistani elite. Now, in some respects, this is the past, in some respects today, India and the United States share the same policy objectives in Pakistan. We both want a stable, democratic, plural society. We don't want Pakistan to be, as it is now, the world's biggest manufacturer of fissile material. We want Pakistan to, no, well, that's India wants, not the United States. We want Pakistan to be secure within its own boundaries, not to lose territory on either east or west, but to be content with a stable government in which the role of the military is reduced. Now, there are then some differences between the Indian expectation and the American expectation. India, I think, would like Pakistan to be reconciled to the realities of geography. Its area is 1/5 India's, its population is 1/7 Indians, its GDP is 1/8 Indians. It's like Mexico and the United States. Now, no one thinks of parity between Mexico and the United States. Therefore, it is illogical and absurd and dangerous to think of parity between Pakistan and India in South Asia. We believe that if Pakistan is reconciled to the realities of geopolitics, it will not use the nuclear umbrella to promote terrorism in India. There may also be differences between the United States and India, but not major differences, on the future of Afghanistan, which is another aspect of Pakistan's foreign policy and Pakistan's relations that I hope Ambassador Blackwill will touch on. We want a stable, secular, democratic Afghanistan. Pakistan sees Afghanistan as giving it strategic depth. There is talk in Pakistan, well, more than talk in Pakistan, and some talk in the United States of coming to terms with moderate members of the Taliban. Many of us in India regard that as an oxymoron. Can there be moderate members of the Taliban? But there it is. There may be differences between us on China's role in this imbroglio. We see China as one of the greatest proliferators in the world, proliferating through North Korea, through Pakistan. The US has a separate relationship with China. But we think China and Afghanistan bear on Pakistan and must be part of US policy. Having said that, let me conclude by saying that India-US relations improved during Ambassador Blackwill's tenure as never before. I am told, I have no evidence for this, he will probably deny it, that when the Republican Party went to the polls, its manifesto for the first time in American political history mentioned the need for a close and firm relationship with India. That was partly Ambassador Blackwill's doing. He was one of the Balkans. And if you don't know what the Balkans are, let me tell you, the Balkan is the fire god, but the Balkans were the group of associates that Condoleezza Rice gathered in Alabama, and they were President George W. Bush's pre-election advisors. Now, there's a lot on the plate, and expect Mr. Blackwill to take up some of these points and take up a lot of additional points also that may not have occurred to me. The procedure is that he will speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer session, which will start off with a tete-a-tete on the dais, and then we throw it open to the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, I have pleasure in presenting to you Ambassador Robert Blackwill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a real delight for me to be back here in Kolkata and to see old friends from earlier times. I will say at the outset that I look forward to questions at some point from the media on what I'm about to say, but permit me not to comment on what the media might have said many years ago, except to say that you'll all agree with me that the media doesn't always get it exactly right. Thank you especially, Aspen, India, for having me. I've watched Aspen, India grow over the last several years into a dynamic, analytical and policy organization. And we at the Council on Foreign Relations, I'm now Henry Kissinger Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. We're delighted to partner with Aspen, India to produce the report on U.S.-India relations, a shared strategic future that was mentioned earlier, just to say that that report is on both the Aspen, India and the Council on Foreign Relations website. So if you'd like to have a look at it, it's there. Well, as our chairman has said, my remarks today will be on the United States and the future of Pakistan. I'm not going to give a Fidel Castro speech here today. I'd rather speak fairly briefly and then have a conversation with such a distinguished audience. So let me begin with these headlines, and I will touch on some of the points that our chairman made. America's relationship with Pakistan is in long-term systemic decline. At its lowest level today in many decades. For 10 years after 9/11, the United States attempted, through succeeding American presidents, to craft a Pakistan policy that would alter Pakistan's calculus in Afghanistan and with respect to terrorism more broadly. The American goal was to establish a long-term bilateral partnership that would empower moderate elements in Pakistan society and shift from Pakistan-India confrontation to South Asian integration. Those were the two pillars of the American strategy, and for a variety of reasons, this strategy has failed. I repeat, this strategy has failed. Instead of a true U.S.-Pakistan partnership, the bilateral relationship has degenerated into occasional positive rhetoric, overlaying a transactional relationship in which Pakistan leases access to bases and land routes into Afghanistan in exchange for massive quantities of U.S. aid. To put it mildly, the United States has had minimum success in altering the behavior of the Pakistan military and of ISI. To give you a sense of what I have in mind here and of the depth of the crisis between the United States and Pakistan now ongoing, let me remind you that just in this year alone, the United States and Pakistan have argued over drones, over a CIA contractor named Raymond Davis, over Osama bin Laden's hideout in Abbottabad, over the assassination of Afghan peace negotiator and former President Rabbani, and over the Taliban attack on the U.S. Embassy in Kabul in September, which ISI orchestrated. And then, of course, in the headlines this week has been the death of 24 Pakistani soldiers, allegedly due to NATO airstrikes. That's only the latest crisis. And with the Pakistan public and press outraged over the latest attack, the country's leaders have chosen to close supply routes to Afghanistan that NATO relies on, as incidentally they've done at least twice before, ordered the CIA to vacate a base it is used to launch drone strikes, and boycotted the International Conference on Afghanistan. Why is this happening between the United States and Pakistan? Most fundamentally, the Pakistan Army and the United States have clearly incompatible objectives regarding the war in Afghanistan. And those incompatible objectives destroy any possibility, in my judgment, of a substantial near-term repair of the U.S.-Pakistan bilateral relationship. As the brilliant Ashley Tellis, my dear friend, a dear friend of many of you I know here, recently observed, the United States seeks to leave behind after 2014 an Afghanistan that is united, capable, and independent. Pakistan, in contrast, seeks an Afghanistan that, although nominally unified, is anything but capable and independent. Specifically, it desires an Afghanistan that would be at least differential to, if not dependent on, Islamabad, where Kabul's critical strategic and foreign policy choices are heavily influenced by Pakistan, if not decided by Pakistan. A stable but subordinate Afghanistan, therefore, remains Pakistan's ultimate strategic goal. Such subservience on the part of Kabul to Pakistan would permit Islamabad to gain an advantage in regard both to managing its independent rivalry with Afghanistan and the challenges posed to Pakistan by the evolving Afghan-Indian geopolitical partnership. For Pakistan, if the international community succeeds in its current endeavors in Afghanistan, it would end up leaving behind a state that would be anything but differential to Pakistan, thus justifying in Pakistan the problematic strategy that is intended to prevent this outcome. So that's the fundamental difference between the United States and Pakistan today. And our chairman helpfully mentioned the recent statements by McCain and Lindsey Graham, and I'd like to give you a flavor of what these two distinguished senators said and a few other American prominent politicians about Pakistan. So here's from the statement that our chairman adverted to, quote, "The United States has been incredibly patient with Pakistan, and we have been so despite certain undeniable and deeply disturbing facts. Most importantly, Pakistan Army and intelligence officials continue to support the Haqqani network and other terrorist groups in Pakistan that are killing U.S. troops in Afghanistan. And the vast majority of the materiel used to make improvised explosive devices used against U.S. forces in Afghanistan originate from 2 fertilizer factories in Pakistan. The time has come for the United States to fully review its relations with Pakistan," they continue. "We must assess the nature and levels of our support for Pakistan. In particular, all options regarding U.S. security and economic assistance to Pakistan must be on the table, including substantial reductions in that aid and stricter standards for performance. Most of all," they say, "U.S. policy toward Pakistan must proceed from the realistic understanding that certain actions of Pakistan's military are contributing to the death and injury of our men and women in the U.S. military and jeopardizing our national security interests." Republican Senator Mark Kirk said after that statement by the two senators, "They're right." He went on, "Military aid to Pakistan is unsustainable," he said, "and in this time of deficits and debt, we ought to save the money." He warned that Pakistan has chosen to embrace terror and back the Haqqani network, but it should do so without subsidies from the U.S. taxpayer. John Huntsman, the U.S. presidential candidate on the Republican side, just this week said, "I would recognize exactly what the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has become, which is completely transactional. I think," he said, "that our expectations have to be very, very low about what we can get out of the Pakistan-U.S. relationship." And finally, Dianne Feinstein, one of the leaders of the Senate, on Pakistan said, "My strong feeling is you can't walk both sides of the street with respect to terror." And unquote. And of course, that's exactly what Pakistan has been doing for well over a decade. Now, this latest breach in the relationship came, as you know, just 5 weeks after the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton led a very senior U.S. delegation to Pakistan to warn Pakistan's leaders that if they did not intensify pressure on the terrorists carrying out attacks into Afghanistan, that there would be severe consequences which would follow. And yet, those admonitions now lie in tatters because of these recent events. Now, let me speak more broadly about the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, and Pakistan, and as our chairman helpfully conceptualized it, India, America, and Pakistan. It seems to me that both the United States and India have an overriding national interest in the safety and security of an ever larger Pakistan nuclear arsenal. On this matter, it seems to me, U.S. and Indian interests largely overlap with the Pakistan military, because the Pakistan Army certainly wants to keep responsible stewardship of these Pakistan nuclear weapons and their stockpile. But as our distinguished chairman has said, what's happening now is that Pakistan is increasing its nuclear arsenal at the fastest rate of any nation in the world, and is the world's largest producer now of fissile material. If you take that, if you also take into account that Pakistan military doctrine seems to be evolving toward battlefield short-range use of nuclear weapons, and if you look at the widespread internal chaos and violence inside Pakistan, I think the United States and India both have to worry in the future about the safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear devices and the material associated with them. This, in my view, is
your voice is falling. It's not carrying right up to the...
Sorry. I don't know quite what to do about that.
We just give you a caller mic if we may.
I'm happy to do. You're in charge. Oh, what the end of that story is. Okay, good. And again, thank you for speaking. I was saying that I think the safety and security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons and material is the most vital interest of both India and Pakistan with respect to India and the United States with respect to Pakistan, although of course we have a lot of other interests as well. Now, I want to truncate some of what I was going to say to adhere to my pledge, but let me just now say something about the development inside Pakistan, in my judgment, which is almost entirely, in my view, negative. A friend of mine back in Washington has a parlor game which he says that he'll buy a fine bottle of wine for anyone who can come to him and persuasively say, "Here's good news from Pakistan." And he says he has not yet had to give anyone that fine bottle of wine. As we know, civil-military relations in Pakistan are Praetorian, with the Pakistan military dominating the dimensions of Pakistan's policy which it cares about. The use of this enormous military budget that Pakistan, I say enormous in the sense of the other calls on the Pakistan budget like flood relief, education, and so forth, is being generated by the Pakistan military in a concept which has India as its center, as the enemy. And therefore, it's not being used to try to deal, or not being primarily used to try to deal with the internal security requirements of the country. Moreover, as we know, and I don't have to tell this audience that I'll go through this rapidly, Pakistan's ISI supports now, as it has since the early 90s, terrorist groups that target India, and now that target Afghanistan, that target ISAF and U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And so my own view is, and we'll discuss this, is that this is an abiding view of the Pakistan Army, which is highly, highly unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. But I think that the news, analytical news, is even perhaps more alarming in some respects, more broadly speaking. Pakistan is showing alarming signs of internal disintegration. Its economy continues to underperform its peers in Asia and the developing world. Despite a period of temporary growth and stability in the mid-2000s, Pakistan remains in near perpetual economic trauma despite historic levels of external assistance. Islamic extremism inside that country is on the rise, and in that context, Pakistan faces endemic violence, with more terrorist attacks inside Pakistan in the last decade than in any other country outside of Afghanistan and Iraq. It was, I think, in this country a decade ago that leaders said that Pakistan was the epicenter of global terrorism. That was a very controversial point to make then. I think it's a commonplace view now. Now, there are two possible paradigm shifts regarding developments in Pakistan which could change the picture I've described and which would be welcomed by India, the United States, and I think virtually every other country in the world. The first paradigm shift would be for the Pakistan Army to reduce its strategic preoccupation with India as the threat and turn its attention to dealing with the terrorist and internal subversion problems inside Pakistan itself. The second paradigm shift would be that Pakistan's civil society demonstrates the strength and will to confront and defeat radical Islamic forces. Sadly, at least to me, sadly, it seems unlikely that either of these paradigm shifts will happen in the foreseeable future, if ever. Given the dire condition of Pakistan's economy, its broken educational system, its violent sectarianism, and its persistent centrifugal tendencies along provincial lines. And as I said, moreover, there are no signs that the Pakistan military realizes the harm its obsession with India is doing to their country. Now, what is it, as I near the end of my presentation, that the United States and India should specifically do to deal with these dawning trends that I've tried very briefly to describe? And to get at that very briefly, what I'd like to read to you is a set of policy prescriptions that these distinguished American and Indian strategists agreed to in the Aspen, India Council on Foreign Relations document that was referred to earlier. These were unanimously agreed by a very distinguished group of 9 Indians and 8 Americans. It was co-chaired the effort, as was said, by Naresh Chandra and myself. So I'd just like to read these to you. I think they'll be a useful way for us to more specifically discuss what India and the United States ought to do about this. So let me just read them to you. The United States, while holding the Pakistan military to a much more exacting code of conduct, should do all it can to avoid a sustained rupture of its relationship with Pakistan. The United States should continue to do everything possible to provide technical assistance to Pakistan to protect its nuclear arsenal and to prevent the transfer of sensitive technology to third parties. India should continue its efforts to convince Pakistan it need not fear destabilization by India in any way, including destabilization of Pakistan via Afghanistan. India should continue its bilateral negotiations with Pakistan on all outstanding issues, including the question of Kashmir. India should attempt to initiate quiet bilateral discussions with Pakistan on Afghanistan, as well as trilateral discussions with Afghanistan. India and the United States should intensify their efforts to reach out to Pakistan's civil society, weak though it is, and Pakistan business community. India's leadership should develop channels, including military to military, to talk with the Pakistan military. The United States and India should intensify existing law enforcement and intelligence cooperation on Pakistan-based terrorist groups. The United States should heavily condition all military aid to Pakistan on sustained, concrete anti-terrorist measures by the Pakistan military against groups targeting India and the United States. Such military aid should be cautious regarding high-end weapon systems that have very little utility in Pakistan's counterinsurgency efforts and missions and would clearly be directed at India. Similarly, economic aid should be conditioned on Pakistan taking those steps necessary for such aid to be effective, notably transparency, accountability, and anti-corruption measures. And the United States and India should begin classified exchanges on multiple Pakistan contingencies, including the collapse of the Pakistan state and the specter of the Pakistan military losing control of its nuclear arsenal. One final troubling thought. In my judgment, if you haven't liked the behavior of Pakistan's military in 2011, and I certainly have not, you will probably like it less in 2012. And if you don't like it in 2012, you'll like it less in 2013. And if the United States meets President Obama's 2014 timeline for U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan, you really won't like the Pakistan military's behavior in 2014. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to our discussion.
Not from it. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, and if I can set the ball rolling by playing devil's advocate here, what drives the Pakistan military? Do they have to create a bogey, a threat perception to retain power domestically, or do they really fear an Indian takeover of some kind? There have been times in American political history when the United States seems to have endorsed the view that India harbored aggressive intentions towards Pakistan. Is this a genuine belief in the military? And you mentioned civil society and the army as two distinctly separate entities. You know, the old American saying, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, comes to mind. Is there any difference between the military and civil society in Pakistan when it comes to India, when it comes to Kashmir, when it comes to bilateral issues? That's one question.
Could I take that one and then let you go to the next one? Because I won't remember your third as you keep going. All right, well, the first, and I think they're both excellent questions, and I appreciate the devil's advocate effort to stimulate the discussion. First of all, I would say that it's very difficult to get at, in any analytical sense, what the various views of the Pakistan military are, because there's very little data on the subject. And so it's not quite a black box, But we all know pollsters are not running around the Pakistan garrisons asking for objective answers to these questions from the Pakistan military. So one has to extrapolate and make what hopefully are educated guesses. And I think it's a variety of reasons. My own impression in talking to Pakistan senior officers, we never have a chance to talk to the more younger officers, is they genuinely believe that deeply in their perception of Kashmir, its history, and so forth. They think that. They think that there are at least some in India who believe that partition was an unnatural act and would like to dismember the country. There are some, I think, who, in addition to those views, watch the Indian military modernize in ways that Pakistan cannot do and see an indefinite future in which the conventional gap between the two countries gets greater and greater. And then I think it's also fair to say that there are widespread benefits that accrue to the Pakistan military in its current configuration and dispositions because of its preoccupation with India. Or to put it differently, what size army would Pakistan need if it didn't have the Indian threat? And what would all those generals and to some extent their wives with their boutiques do for a living if India did not exist as a threat? So I think it's an amalgam of all of those, and one, at least, I don't know how one would get into the minds of the corps commanders and the leadership of the Pakistan military. I'll stop there on that one.
Well, the second question is fairly simple. It's about your country. There have in the past been instances when the CIA has produced evidence of Pakistan making the bomb, and other branches of the American administration have suppressed that evidence. Is there any difference of opinion now on Pakistan between, say, the State Department, Pentagon, White House, Congress? Is there a Pakistani lobby in one of these institutions?
Well, there's always disagreements across these agencies in the United States on any subject, including which direction does the sun rise. So, by the way, I understand that there are such disagreements sometimes even within India. What a shock! But there is no difference of view about the rapidity with which Pakistan is increasing its nuclear arsenal. So that's the first. There's no disagreement about that. The second is, and this is a sobering thought, Pakistan today in Washington has virtually no friends. And if you had I spent, as you know, 14 years at Harvard on the faculty. If I had 2 graduate students, I could send them off and say, do research for me on every time a prominent American mentions the word Pakistan in this calendar year. And they're 95% negative. And this is new. It's always, there were periods when they were largely positive, especially immediately after 9/11 and so forth. And that leads me to make this brief point. In some sense, that's distressing. Because a Pakistan that feels isolated, bereft of friends, perhaps except for China, is a more dangerous Pakistan. And that's the reason, as you heard, that when we did this report, we urged both Washington to try to avoid a rupture and India to keep reaching out, although we were, I think, modest in our expectations. But it's going to be more and more difficult, I think, for Washington and New Delhi to manage the relationship with Pakistan because of the behavior of the Pakistan military. And we're both democracies, we're responsive to public opinion, and public opinion will watch these developments, including regarding Afghanistan, and who knows what terrorist attack might be launched against India from Pakistan, and demand of its government, of its democratically elected government, I think, pretty stern approaches to Pakistan. So this is going to be very difficult for both the United States and India to manage.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite question from floor? I see a hand right at the back there already. Will you give your name and affiliation, if there's any, and ask a question, not make a speech, please?
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Kakuli Sengupta. I teach in the Department of International Relations, Jadavpur University. I would first like to say that I found the presentation absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for throwing light on, the US-Pakistan and the US-India relationship too. But I have two concerns. The first one is that I do not really see the logic of the NATO strike on Pakistan military outpost recently, which killed so many Pakistani soldiers. And could it be that America wanted to send a message to Pakistan that we have the power to hurt you, and we will if you don't listen to us? Could it be that we are not really getting the support with regard to the Haqqani network, etc., and also maybe mixed with the fact that Osama bin Laden was in a safe haven in Pakistan all the time? That's the first point. The second one, I'll make it brief, is that, India regards America as a valuable ally. And I think India would like to see more support from America, especially when David Coleman Headley has already admitted in his testimony about the people responsible for the Mumbai attack. So can India expect more cooperation from America in bringing these people who brought about so many, innocent lives were killed, including American lives? So can they be brought to justice? Thank you.
But back in India, so there's no shortage of conspiracy theories here. I do not believe, although there's a big investigation going on, that the United States sat in dark rooms in the Pentagon and said, why don't we kill some Pakistan soldiers? I think that the United States morally would never do such a thing, but another reason it wouldn't do it is they'd read it in the New York Times the next day that meeting took place and that's what they decided. So I don't know, and nobody does now, what actually happened. It's clearly a tragedy. By the way, I've heard, even since I've only been in India 36 hours, no, that wasn't the conspiracy. The conspiracy was Pakistan killed these 24, and so forth. So there's a big investigation going on. Sadly, Pakistan declined to be a part of that investigation. We'll see what happened. But it was definitely a tragedy. The Headley business is interesting, and it shows the irony of, and by the way, thank you for enjoying my presentation, but it shows the irony of my feeling, and I think many of your feelings, that on the one hand, we want Pakistan to be called to account for its behavior, but as we do so, we have less and less influence on Islamabad. So you say, properly, can the United States do something in Pakistan, in Islamabad, to pressure, persuade, coerce the Pakistan government to be responsive to India regarding the Mumbai terrorists? And the answer is less and less, because U.S. relations with Pakistan are worse and worse. So there is this paradox, but I wouldn't look forward to either India or the United States having much luck in that regard in the period ahead.
Mr. Bhagat?
This is one side. Although the people have benefited, I believe children are going to school in Afghanistan. I believe national health care is much better now. On the other side, Pakistan has this phobia, the army, that unless they are Afghanistan, then they'll be encircled between Afghanistan and India. So use Afghanistan as a buffer. I don't think in the immediate future the army will remain control. Therefore, sir, the question comes after 2014, with your relations changed with Pakistan, which may not improve, Pakistan will do its best either through the Taliban or through other forces to get control into Afghanistan, which they did before you invaded. Now this is a dangerous situation. You have sunk in money and lives, India is doing a lot of work, so this could be a very dangerous situation. Do you think the US government at that time might review its policy? Because personally I don't feel by 2014 the Afghan army can protect itself against Pakistan. What is your view, Mr. Doctor?
I think those are very thoughtful comments and very thoughtful question. Let me just say to start, though, the price for the war, depending on how in Afghanistan, the United States, depending on how you calculate it, is twice what you said. It's probably about $800 billion, depending on how you calculate it. I don't know first of all, I think your analysis is right, although 2014 is going to be a very dicey year if the Pakistan military sees the American army leaving Afghanistan. I would expect the level of violence to increase, Taliban offensive to increase, and so forth. Second, I agree entirely with you that the Afghanistan security forces will not be ready to deal with the Taliban supported by the Pakistan military in 2014. They're making some important strides in that regard, but they will not be ready. So my own view, and again, it's on the Council, if I can let you know, it's on the Council on Foreign Relations website. It's a piece I had in Foreign Affairs about a year ago called Plan B, which recommends a prolonged American, though smaller, force in Afghanistan much into the future. I'll add one other thing, and I say this with regret. American presidents in their first term often make big mistakes. A historian of the U.S. Presidency sitting next to me. And one thinks of the Bay of Pigs with John Kennedy and so forth. There are a variety of issues that President Obama has done, which I support myself, but I think he made an enormous, and you imply this, sir, an enormous strategic mistake in setting the deadline for American military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Because in that one single speech, he removed all leverage of the United States on Pakistan and the Taliban. Why in the world should the Taliban negotiate a settlement on Afghanistan when it knows the Americans are leaving? Why in the world would Pakistan military urge the Taliban to reach a fair and negotiated settlement in Afghanistan when the Pakistan military knows the Americans are leaving? Whether the Americans will actually leave, we'll have to see. I don't have a crystal ball. It'll have something to do with how our election turns out in 2012. But my own personal view is we should stay with smaller forces much longer.
Yes, sir.
My name is G.M. Kapoor. I'm a member of the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy. And my question to you is, do you see any possibility of realignment of borders where Balochistan and Northwest Frontier Province align with Afghanistan? Do you see any such possibility?
Well, I suppose that Pashtun irredentism in particular could produce that, but it would be a disaster. You have a country that has 100+ nuclear weapons and dozens of nuclear sites. I, as an analyst and a world citizen and an American strategist, do not want this country to start coming to pieces. If it were to happen, that would be very dangerous. But again, it's paradoxical that the very policies of the Pakistan military is making that more likely by the support for the Pashtun in Afghanistan, for ignoring the Durand Line, and so forth. And I can't imagine what's in their heads. I have to say, and I'm sure that there are a lot of smart people among them, but I can't imagine what's in their heads, because they at least might, I'm not saying they would, change Pashtun wish to expel the Americans, partly on religious reasons, into Pashtun nationalist irredentism across the border. So I think it would be very dangerous. Baluchistan's a separate issue, and I don't think that that's as likely. And one of the reasons I would like an equitable solution to Afghanistan in which the Pashtuns have their proper place in the country and so forth, and maybe even some Taliban elements are, if they renounce violence and so forth, are part of the new regime, is to make less likely that this fracturing of the Pakistan state will start happening.
But it's panel they're aware of this email from a Rawalpindi journalist I mentioned, said that the US and India-Israel conspiracy to destroy Pakistan would begin with the secession of Baluchistan at their encouragement. So.
Hello. Yes. Now I feel what you suggested and informed, and what India and states are doing and many other countries are doing. I think basic problem is slightly understood and everybody is after to find a solution. States has found, India may take another 10 years because of the political reason. My basic question is here, you see, we have to work towards elimination which may happen in future. Basic humanity, basic principles are still lacking. There are many countries in the world, like Dubai. If somebody goes during a particular period, he cannot have even water during the day period. He will be put into jail. And this is known everywhere, but nobody is doing anything to tackle this problem. Similarly, there are some countries which are against basic norms of humanity. So if those things are not tackled in advance, again the same situation may arise and we may take 30 to 40 years to tackle those places, those areas. Thank you.
Have a mic for the rest of the room to hear you.
Mic is on the way.
Thank you. My name is Shekhar Doctor. I'm a former president of CII. If I may, with permission of the chair, start with a very less serious comment. Somebody mentioned that what can we do with the Pakistan army to get them or win them over to be more friendly towards the neighbors. One of the ways, and please take it in the vein that I'm speaking to you, is perhaps get them more interested in business. Pakistan army is supposed to be more interested in making money than really fighting a war. So maybe that gets them involved in some business. But apart from that less frivolous comment I made, you mentioned, Ambassador, that the relation between India and Pakistan, particularly where America comes into the picture, is relating to what has happened historically. If I may say so, no disrespect to anything, Pakistan's current status, politically and in the geopolitical scene, really started from the days when America looked at Pakistan differently than what they do look at them now. They've probably been bitten once and they don't want to be bitten again. Having said that, and that's because of the historical reason of the past presidents' policies that they have formulated. But since you say that, what is it that we can do? What if, with all the efforts that America is making, the rest of the world is making, to somehow get Pakistan to see light of the day and getting the terrorists out of the way, what if you cannot tackle that with China breathing down the neck of Pakistan too, in a way, and be friendly with them? Can you really take Pakistan on the way you have taken on Iraq or Afghanistan? My response would be no. Militarily, you will not be able to do that because you're going to start a huge problem in this region. And since you also mentioned that the fissile material is one of the largest producers, and they're looking at short-range nuclear devices, who is the target? Target is obviously India. So India, by default perhaps, gets sucked into, shall I say, conflict with the rest of the world that Taliban or Islamic activities may have. What is it that you prescribe as a former ambassador of Pakistan, of America in India? And if you were the ambassador today, what would you advise your government?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. There are no Iraq, Afghanistan military options available to the United States regarding Pakistan. It would be a catastrophe for the United States to think about using widespread military force in Pakistan contingency. So that's point one. You're absolutely right. But second, you raise this issue. Well, let me do a little bit of history. I think that American policy since the mid-90s was misguided with respect to Pakistan's terrorism against India. It should have been much tougher, much earlier. Once 9/11 occurred, of course, we were dependent on Pakistan for the supply of our forces. In Afghanistan, they had more leverage on us than we had on them. And that explains over that period why I think we were too easy on Pakistan. And some of you will remember that I didn't agree with this when I was that American policy when I was ambassador in Delhi. But what to do about it now? I gave those sets of prescriptions. But I will make one point which I think is consistent with your intervention. At this stage, the future of Pakistan as a nation state is going to be decided by the Pakistanis. It's not going to be decided by the Indians. It's not going to be decided by the Americans or anybody, or by the Chinese. And that's the reason I'm worried about what I regard as some of the alarming internal trends inside Pakistan. This doesn't mean we shouldn't try to influence them. We certainly should. We should keep all of the avenues of discussion open. But this is not Muhammad Ali Jinnah's Pakistan anymore. And the question is how far down that road does it go? And I'm very worried about it. But we as outsiders are not going to have a serious influence on that. I think you might say we can perhaps make it slightly worse if our policies are misguided, but I don't think we can make it much better. It's going to be up to the Pakistanis. They are going to decide the future of their country. And again, that's one of our colleagues was trying to promote civil society. Boy, do I applaud that. I think that's really worth doing. The more the better, because the ultimate rescue of Pakistan, if it happens, will be through Pakistan civil society, if it happens.
Gentleman here.
My name is Subhash Roy. I'm an economist but now retired. I have a few questions. You mentioned...
Don't make it a few, sir. One, please.
I have two at least.
Well, you can ask two and pretend it's one.
or I can ask two and you can answer only one. The question is, I find that United States has suddenly started finding fault with Pakistan. Now, is it something, was the malaise recent, or has it developed of late? Why? You haven't explained why. Because you have been protecting since, I know of, 1947 onwards, any regime, military regime, the staunchest ally has been the United States. You haven't cared almost at all about democracy in Pakistan. Now, do you consider, the second question is, do you consider United States, does it consider other countries as sovereign? At whose invitation did you go to Afghanistan? At whose invitation did you go to Pakistan to begin with? And is it not a fact that you just ignore the sentiments of the Pakistanis, United States interest comes first. That is the predominant consideration. Now, you do not develop trust on that basis. If it is the big brother all the way, stamping away that I have the muscles and keep shut, keep your mouth shut, that is no way to instill confidence even with Indians. This is what I'm saying.
Well, there are many points there, and I just for reasons of time, and others want to take part in our discussion. So let me just do two. I, in my presentation, tried to characterize U.S. policy toward Pakistan today. I don't think I implied that it was a perfect picture for decade after decade, and some of the times when I was in the government I disagreed with it. And historians in the United States and in India and in Pakistan can find fault with it. But that wasn't the subject of my presentation. And since I wasn't in government for most of that period, you'll permit me if I don't feel guilty about it personally. The second thing, though, is you asked, well, what's changed? And here's the way I would characterize it, and I think that's an excellent question, and I tried to say it, but too telegraphically. After 9/11 and after the defeat of the expulsion of the Taliban from Afghanistan, the U.S. had a theory of the case regarding Pakistan, that with more military aid, more economic aid, more intense interaction with the Pakistan elite, especially the military, the Pakistan military could be weaned away from this behavior of supporting terrorism and so forth. That wasn't a crazy strategy. It just didn't work. And that happens, and we all know, in public policy and in business, and not in academia where they don't really do strategy, but in organizations. It was a strategy that didn't work. But it wasn't a crazy strategy. I think it, and again, I'm not speaking for the Obama administration, but I think in the last 2 years it's become more and more vivid that it didn't work. And I just point out to you, Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, maybe did more than anyone to try to make it work with General Kayani, 18 visits and so forth. And you remember his valedictory before the Senate, in which he said the Pakistan military supports the Haqqani network and is therefore culpable in the killing of American forces. The last point is, and I say it unapologetically, as an American strategist, of course I think of American national interests first. You think Indian strategists don't think of Indian national interests first? Of course I do. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take others into account, but of course I do. And in my opinion, any American president who got up and said, well, I'd like to take Pakistan's national interests into account before America's, wouldn't spend the night in the White House. So I'm unapologetic about that, and I think nation states, in the first instance, worry about their own people, and properly so.
Sir.
Two more.
After this, we have two more.
Okay.
Sir, my name is Colonel Shivaji. I'm glad that you like Jaisalmer. I was station commander Jaisalmer from 2001 to 2004. Now, in 99, the Kargil invasion happened. In 2001, there was an attack in Indian Parliament. And on both the occasions, Indian Army was ready for a surgical strike inside Pakistan to dismantle the terror camps in POK. And if I may so, on both the occasions, US put pressure on India, preventing from India doing so. Now, one of the perception that was going around till recently is that US deliberately is using Pakistan as a counterweight in its strategy bleeding India by 1,000 cuts, so that India as a nation in South and Southeast Asia do not develop and reach its full potential. Would you like to comment on that?
I want to understand what the conspiracy is. That the United States, and then correct me, I may have misunderstood, the United States is using Pakistan to weaken India. Is that the conspiracy? Yes. Well, all I do, I never heard that one, so it's great to be back in the look at 10 years, I just say 2 things, 10 years beginning in the Bush administration, now through the Obama administration, in the enormous effort that the United States has made with its Indian counterparts to transform the U.S.-India relationship, to break the hyphenation that was referred to earlier, to treat India as a rising great power. So that's a preposterous idea. And I think that those who would author that idea ought to ask the Pakistanis if that's what they think. Because they, of course, say again and again that the United States is destroying the regional balance by its relationship with India. So that's just silly.
There's someone over there.
May I? Can ladies have a chance? Yes. May I?
Yes.
Okay, my name is A.C. Misra. I don't belong to any organization. I'm a citizen. You know, India, Pakistan and US, we make a very amusing threesome. And United States has been bed hopping for quite a while. Surprisingly, history does not begin with 9/11. And long before United States needed supply routes to Afghanistan, they have been nurturing the Pakistan military, Pakistan as a country. And I'm reminded of Mrs. Hillary Clinton's phrase, snake in the backyard. You have been nurturing, or America has been nurturing this, and they've been feeding the snake with milk and bananas, as we say in Bengal, with dollars and ammunition. And as long as Pakistan was hissing at India, it was okay. But now that she is bearing her fangs at the United States, all of a sudden United States is concerned. So would you like to comment on that, please?
You know, I'm not that long history, but it does, I think you'll be amused by this. As I said, I spent 14 years as a Harvard professor, and Harvard professors never ask real questions. What they do is but they know that their colleagues expect that there's going to be a question somewhere in there as they really just want to make a statement. So the Harvard Convention, which I commend you all, is to make a long statement, but then realizing that there has to be an interrogatory moment, you say, don't you agree? At the end. So you're, no, I don't agree. I don't agree. It's a good, you ask it in a good-natured way. But all I would say is that in the evolution of U.S. foreign policy towards South Asia, and I'll stay away from the metaphors like bed hopping and so forth in my mind. They're entertaining, but I don't think they get us very far. U.S. policy in some periods was affected by the Cold War. I mean, there is a peculiarity that during those decades, India was the only democracy in the world with which the United States didn't have good relations, and so forth. So there were many anomalies during that period. There were periods which I think you and I would agree that American policy, particularly on the nuclear side, was permissive for too long regarding Pakistan and so forth. But as an analyst, as a strategist, I'm interested in reading books about Cargill. I am. It was before I came, but I'm interested in reading books about it. But I think the real challenge for the governments and for people interested in public policy is, what do we do now? What does the United States and India do now, together and separately, to try to ameliorate the dangers emanating from Pakistan? And I would say this now explicitly. I think that the United States and India today as we have this good discussion, have closer views on Pakistan than ever before in the history of the relationship. And they're not perfectly identical, but they're much, much closer than they've ever been. And I regard that as positive. I regard that as positive.
So, it was going to be the last question, but I think there's one last here, second last.
Okay.
So, the tone and tenor of your discussions and your statements were very encouraging. In fact, are very encouraging, including the last sentence that you said just now. But the problem is one, sir. It's been noticed that American officials very often have been stating similar views when they are in India. When they go to Pakistan, it seems that they have a twin brother or something, because they speak a completely different language. And when they go to the White House, it's something quite different. Or when it's in the Pentagon, it's something quite different. A press statement made is one thing, and then a clarification comes which is completely different. So would you like to comment upon this? What you said here is very encouraging. If you said the same thing in Washington, it would be even more encouraging.
Well,
and the Pentagon.
I do, of course, and I write it and so forth, but I'm not a member of the government. But let me just speak structurally about that. First of all, I think there's less disagreement within the executive branch now and with the Congress about Pakistan than in a very long time, and I tried to say that. But it is true that America has a very complicated and sometimes undisciplined system of government. We do. And so we're not always consistent in our statements about any particular issue. You're quite right to point that out. But I think if you look back, say, in just this calendar year, and I had those 2 Harvard graduate students again, and go off and see what the Obama administration has said about Pakistan, I think that there's a consistency in what they've said. And I think it's gotten steadily harder, and I think that's because of the behavior of the Pakistan military. So while I take it as a fair criticism that there are sometimes disparate voices and clarifications, I don't think that's the dominant picture now of the Obama administration's policy toward Pakistan. I think that Hillary Clinton says the same, and this is a matter of public record, says basically the same thing in Pakistan, in India, and before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I think she says basically the same thing.
So the last question.
Former General Arun Roy. Ambassador, I have an issue with the statement that you made about, and you reiterated that Pakistanis have to decide about their own future. Now let's play a situation wherein the Taliban and the terrorists are virtually running over Pakistan. The normal Pakistani and good thinking, well thinking people. Where do they flee to? They can't flee to Afghanistan, Iran or India. So the only place left is China and the other Central Asian state. And impacting on them. What do you think China and the Central Asian states will do then? It's a Bangladeshi situation when 20 million refugees landed up in India, and India had to do something about it.
Well, what I have no idea is the answer, but I just say to that, what India would do about such a catastrophic situation, and you recognize that would be a catastrophic situation, given the nuclear weapons in particular located in Pakistan. India would have to decide. I don't have any advice to give India in that respect. They'd have to decide. The United States is not going to war with Pakistan. As you've noticed, in the last decade, not all of our wars worked out all that well. We're not going to war. And I would just myself as an analyst say, military intervention in Pakistan to try to stop the chaos, what a nightmare to try to do that at the size of this country and the population. And I think that's the reason That's a different question than the one about Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and that's the reason I put such an emphasis on the Pakistan military keeping control of those weapons, because I believe they do want to be responsible custodians of their safety and security. Targeting is another matter. So one just hopes it will not come to that. But it is an alternative future in which the radical Islamic tide just rises higher and higher. And that would especially produce your thoughtful point about the refugees, a catastrophic set of dilemmas for India to deal with.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for a very lively session. I'm sure we could go on forever. In fact, I still see hands going up. If we'd gone from table to table, I'm afraid no more questions. It was announced that that was the last question. I'm awfully sorry. We would have gone round from table to table and everyone would have had something. No more questions, sir. It was announced that was the last question. Now, this is Indian optimism and Indian resilience. I must confess, I'm not going to inflict another speech on you, but I must confess I faced this afternoon with some nervousness because recently Ambassador Blackwill held a round or presided a round table in Delhi, and the reports I read of that, about that, didn't allow anyone else to get a word in edgeways. Even Ambassador Naresh Chandra had his hand up twice and was told that there was no time for it. Now, this has proved a very different.
Where do you get these stories? My last round table in India was in 2003. Where do you get these stories?
Well,
you're a novelist. You're a novelist.
You, sir, as having been a reporter for the Wichita Eagle Beacon, even if only a football reporter would understand how the media does get its story. I have nothing more to add except just one point, and that's on terrorism. Both the present ambassador, acting ambassador in New Delhi, and Ambassador Blackwill have been very strong friends of India on that score. Peter Burleigh was the first American diplomat as American representative at the UN to say that there are significant signs that Pakistan is instigating terrorist attacks. And Mr. Blackwill, was it in the Financial Times or when leaving India, said that the war on terrorism would not end until terrorist attacks on India ceased. That's important because there had been a tendency until then, there still is in the West, to look on terrorism in India as part of the freedom struggle in Kashmir and not part of jihadi Islamism. Now, he demolished that superficial defense and put it in perspective as terrorism globally. And we're grateful for that. We hope it will have some impact on American thinking. It's already having it. With that, we will say thank you to Ambassador Blackwill for a very interesting.
This is actually what we love about Aspen India sessions in Kolkata especially. We always have more people than who pre-register, so we always house full, and we always have more questions than we can handle in a session, but we really do appreciate it, and we love you being here as a lively audience, and we love these open forum dialogues and discussions. Ambassador Blackwill, we really appreciate you coming down to Kolkata for the day. And Mr. Datta-Ray, appreciate you chairing this and skillfully moderating the session. I would invite you all to join us for lunch. And Ambassador Blackwill, would you do a quick?
You're in charge.
We'll invite the press to just have like 5 minutes with Ambassador Blackwill, maybe right here. And please do join us for lunch and